Hello and welcome to No Sleep Horror Stories. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Story 1. Ethan told himself he wasn't crazy. But lately, he wasn't so sure. It began 2 years ago, on a night he hadn't even wanted to be out. Bars were too loud, too crowded, nothing like the quiet, comfortable gatherings he preferred. But his best friend, Caleb, had just been cheated on, and Ethan couldn't say no to keeping him company. The place smelled faintly of stale beer and cheap perfume. Colored lights swept lazily across the crowd. Ethan sat in a dark corner, nursing an overpriced whiskey, watching Caleb on the dance floor. His friend moved with a kind of awkward energy, half charm, half desperation, that somehow seemed to work on the girl he was talking to. Ethan wasn't looking for anyone. His last relationship had ended months before, not in anger, but in quiet exhaustion. He'd promised himself a break from dating, time to figure out who he was. Then it happened, a sudden jolt. Cold liquid splashed across his shirt. He looked up and saw her, eyes wide, hands fluttering in apology. Her name was Claire. And in that moment, the world around them seemed to dim. She wasn't flawless like someone from a magazine. She was something better. There was a warmth about her, like seeing an old photograph you didn't remember taking but somehow missed. They talked for hours, learned each other's favorite films, odd hobbies, the little quirks that made them laugh. She was in her final year of psychology, minoring in philosophy, dreaming of a PhD. She loved night walks, saying the world felt like it belonged only to her when everyone else was asleep. By the time they stepped outside and walked through the quiet streets until sunrise, Ethan already knew this was something different. Over the next months, they were inseparable. Because of her school schedule and his weekend job, they mostly met at night. Movies, home-cooked dinners, endless walks under dim street lights. She never invited him to her apartment, claiming her roommates were too loud, too intrusive. Ethan didn't mind. A year later, she arrived at his door in tears. She'd had a brutal fight with her roommates and needed somewhere to escape. Without hesitation, Ethan suggested they move in together. He was already looking at a 2-bedroom outside of town. She hesitated only because she couldn't afford much rent. He told her it didn't matter. The first 3 months living together were perfect. They adjusted easily. Ethan was certain he'd marry her. Then things began to change. Claire opened up one night about her past. Parents killed in a car crash when she was in middle school. A grandmother who raised her until she, too, passed away. Ethan found it strange she'd never mentioned it before, but didn't press. She didn't have friends. Declined every attempt to meet Caleb or double date. Then slowly, she began to withdraw. She stayed late at school, missed dinners, slept through the day, ate almost nothing. Ethan begged her to see a doctor. She resisted for weeks before finally agreeing. The appointment was set for August 1st, 9:30 a.m. That morning, Ethan woke up alone. The car was still outside, no note, no trace of her. He called her, disconnected, checked his contacts. Her name was gone. Panic rising, he called Caleb. "She's gone," Ethan said. "Deleted her number, disconnected her phone. Claire's gone." There was a pause. Then Caleb asked, "Who's Claire?" At first, Ethan thought it was a cruel joke, but Caleb insisted he'd never heard of her. Heart pounding, Ethan drove to her college. At the front desk, he asked about her classes. The receptionist typed for what felt like forever, then said there was no record of a Claire Morgan enrolled. He sought out her professor. But the man didn't recognize the name either. Ethan pulled out his phone to show a picture and froze. Every photo of Claire was gone. In the ones they'd taken together, he stood alone. Sometimes his arm rested in empty air. Desperate, he called his mother. Surely she'd remember the woman she'd met so many times. "Claire who?" she said. When Ethan returned home, her clothes, books, and belongings were gone. The lease bore only his signature, all except for one thing. On his desk sat a single photograph, just him, sitting on the couch. He remembered the moment perfectly. Claire had taken it. She'd told him it was her favorite picture of him. But if she'd never existed, then who had been holding the camera? It was the only proof he had left. Proof that he wasn't insane. Since then, Ethan has searched. He's found others, people whose partners had vanished without a trace, erased from photographs and memories alike. Some gave up, some lost their minds. Ethan refuses to do either. Somewhere out there, Claire is real, and he's going to find her, no matter what it takes. Story 2. When I was 7 years old, my older brother, Caleb, drowned in the lake at the end of our street. He was 13. It was summer, and I remember the air smelling like sunscreen and cut grass. One minute he was running ahead of me with his friends. The next, he was gone. They pulled him out hours later. I didn't understand much back then, only that my parents' faces had changed in a way I didn't recognize, like the grief carved something permanent into them. After Caleb's funeral, my parents never touched his room. They tried once. I remember my mother standing in the doorway, garbage bags in hand, staring at his posters and the pile of clothes still draped over his desk chair. After a minute, she put the bags down and walked away. My dad didn't even try. The door stayed shut after that. His room became a kind of shrine, a museum no one ever visited. That was 11 years ago. Nothing in there has changed. This morning, while packing for my first semester of college, I decided to go in. Not for anything dramatic. I just thought I'd grab a couple of his old hoodies, maybe a keepsake or two. Something to hold on to when homesickness hit. I've been in his room plenty of times before, usually when my parents were out. I'd sit on his bed, skim the spines of his books, glance at the faded trophies on his shelf. But I never dug through his things. That always felt wrong, like crossing a line. Today was supposed to be the same, just quick, quiet. But when I opened the bottom drawer of his dresser, I found them. 3 DVDs, no cases, no labels, except for the numbers written in black marker, 1, 2, and 3. The only DVD player left in the house was still hooked up to his old boxy TV. Everything else we owned had gone digital years ago. I stared at the discs for a long time, told myself they were nothing. Home movies, maybe, or some random TV shows he'd recorded. I even set them back in the drawer and picked up the hoodies I'd come for. But tonight, they started calling to me. I know how it sounds, like I'm exaggerating, but it didn't feel like curiosity. It felt physical, a pull in my chest, like a hand curling around my ribs and tugging. So I crossed the hallway, slipped into Caleb's room, and locked the door. I slid 1 into the DVD player. The screen flickered with static before resolving into a grainy, warped image. It could have been our living room, or maybe a hallway. The furniture shifted, changing size between frames, the colors muted and wrong. Sometimes the picture bent into something like a bedroom, but not his, not mine. There were no faces, only shadows, but there were voices. I heard laughter, the clink of dishes, and my mom calling Caleb's name from somewhere just out of view. My chest tightened when I heard him answer, his voice bright and warm. Then came his laugh, loud, real, exactly as I remembered it. I was still trying to swallow the ache in my throat when another voice cut through, low, deliberate, so close to the microphone it sounded wet. "You haven't noticed yet." The screen went black. My hands were trembling when I pressed play again. I told myself I just wanted to hear him laugh one more time. I didn't want to think about that last line. Didn't want to think about who or what was speaking. But the second time, I caught something I'd missed before. Just before Caleb laughed, a faint yellow caption flickered in the corner of the screen. July 30th, 2015. 7 months after he drowned. I froze. My stomach dropped so fast, it felt like the floor had tilted under me. It had to be a glitch. Maybe the camera's clock had been wrong. Maybe whoever recorded it never set the date. That's what I told myself, even though I knew my parents never owned a video camera. I pressed play again. His laugh filled the room, and for a heartbeat, my fear eased. He was here again, alive in that tiny flickering square of the TV screen. Then the voice returned, closer now, cutting in and out with static. "You noticed." I ripped the DVD out and threw it across the room. It hit the wall and spun to the floor. My breath came fast and shallow, my hands slick with sweat. I wanted to leave, but the other 2 discs sat under the TV like they were waiting for me. I told myself I wouldn't touch them, but they feel patient, and I don't think they're going to stop calling. It's late now. The rain has started, drumming against the roof. The bathroom faucet down the hall always drips, but tonight, the sound is heavier, slower, almost like footsteps. I didn't mean to put it in. I told myself I wouldn't. I even shoved the remaining DVDs to the back of Caleb's dresser drawer, buried them under an old baseball glove and a tangle of forgotten cords. But I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his laugh. Not the way I remembered it. This time it echoed, stretching unnaturally, like it was being played back on a warped tape. By morning, I was exhausted. My thoughts felt heavy, sluggish. The second disc was already sitting on Caleb's desk, like I'd set it there without remembering. I locked the door again, slid 2 into the player, static. Then an image formed, blurry, oversaturated with yellow light. The camera was inside a small room, walls bare except for a single window. The curtain shifted, but outside was only darkness. In the center of the room was a chair. Someone was sitting in it. They were facing the window, head tilted down, hair hanging forward so I couldn't see their face. But I knew the hoodie. Dark green, with a frayed hem where Caleb used to chew the strings. He wasn't moving. From somewhere off-screen, a man's voice said, "Turn around." The figure in the chair didn't move. "Turn around," the voice repeated. Then the camera shifted, like it had taken a step closer. The chair creaked. Caleb's head lifted just enough for me to see his mouth curve into a faint, too wide smile. It wasn't the kind of smile you give to someone you love. It was the kind you give when you already know something they don't. The voice spoke again, softer this time. "She's watching." I didn't want to see his face. I didn't want him to look at me. But I couldn't stop staring. Then, without warning, the figure in the chair turned his head, fast, straight into the camera, straight at me. His eyes were completely black, the footage cut to static, and over it, almost too quiet to hear, came the sound of dripping water. It's been 2 days since I watched the second disc. I've avoided the third one as best I can, but it doesn't matter. I hear the dripping everywhere now, bathroom, kitchen, even my bedroom. My parents don't notice. I dream of the lake. I wake up smelling the algae, feeling the cold pull at my ankles. Tonight, I gave in. I sat on Caleb's bed, disc 3 in my lap. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I slid it into the player. The screen stayed black for a long time, just the faint hiss of audio. Then slowly, an image faded in. It was the lake. The camera was low to the ground, right at the shoreline. I could hear the water lapping softly, and somewhere behind it, breathing. Something moved in the water, pale just beneath the surface. The camera zoomed in, a face. His face. Caleb's eyes opened underwater, looking directly into the lens. His lips moved, but the sound came from behind me in the room. "You're next." The water on the screen rippled, and suddenly the camera was falling forward, plunging beneath the surface, the image blurred with bubbles and darkness. And then I was looking at myself. Not a reflection, not a photo. Me underwater. My hair drifting, my eyes closed, my skin gray. The screen went black. I tore the disc out and left the room without turning off the TV. The rain outside hasn't stopped, and the dripping is louder than ever. I think it's coming from inside the walls. Story 3. Nathan Harrow hadn't planned to write anything down, not ever. The memories were corrosive enough inside his head, without putting them into words where they could breathe and spread. But he had reached a point where silence was worse than confession. Nathan had once been a homicide detective, a good one if his case record meant anything. Now he was retired, or, as the department had put it in cold legal terms, no longer fit for duty. The truth was murkier and uglier. Too many mistakes, too many ghosts. One of those ghosts had a name: Adam Carver. 20 years earlier, Adam had vanished walking home from school, 10 years old. The kind of kid who always lingered too long in conversations, curious about things other people brushed off. That curiosity was probably what had led him into the woods alone. The search had been exhaustive. Dogs, aerial sweeps, line searches with volunteers combing the undergrowth in perfect rows. Nathan remembered the numb sting in his cheeks from cold wind, the heavy smell of wet earth, the way the trees stood silent and disinterested in human tragedy. And then, nothing. No footprints, no fibers, no body. Adam's absence became a permanent wound. A month later, Nathan stood in the Carvers' living room to deliver the news. David Carver, Adam's father, looked like he'd been surviving on coffee and grief. Helen, Adam's mother, sat hunched on the couch, eyes locked on a looping home video. In the recording, Adam wore a red, puffy jacket and orange hair like a halo of static, his freckles bright against pale winter skin. "Mommy, watch this," he'd called, running and diving into a heap of leaves. He reappeared, grinning, a gap between his teeth, laughing like the world was weightless. Helen restarted the clip every time it ended, rubbing a small silver pendant at her throat, lips moving with the soundless echo of her son's voice. When Nathan told them the search was ending, Helen broke instantly. Her cries were jagged, animal things. She accused him of breaking his promise. Then she left the room, her sobs trailing up the staircase like the last notes of a song that wouldn't end. David's voice was flat when he asked Nathan to leave. 15 years later, they were both gone. David had drunk himself to death. Helen had driven off a bridge one black winter night. Nathan carried the unshakable knowledge that in their eyes, he had failed them. On the 20th anniversary of Adam's disappearance, Nathan came home to find a plain white envelope sitting on his dining table. No stamp, no address, Someone had delivered it by hand. Inside was a letter, written in tidy, deliberate pen strokes. Dear Detective Harrow, if things had gone differently, this letter would have been for Adam's parents. I regret they'll never hear my explanation, though I doubt they could have understood. But you might. I watched you search for me. I saw you on the news. I saw you in person, too. You never noticed me, just another face passing by. But I noticed you. I am the one who took Adam Carver. I remember luring him into my car. I remember the way my hands shook. I want you to know I never touched him. Not like that. And I want that to be known. On the back of this letter are coordinates. Follow them, and you will finally understand. But if you bring the police, you'll waste your only chance to make this right. Nathan read the letter 3 times before flipping it over. Coordinates, 30 minutes from town. Deep forest. He didn't call the police. The decision was immediate and absolute. If this man was there, Nathan wasn't going to arrest him. He was going to kill him. The drive out was a blur of snow and headlights. The leather steering wheel creaked under his grip. His jaw ached from clenching his teeth. Every mile closer, his mind replayed the letter's taunting lines. I saw you in person. You never noticed me. He left the paved road for a narrow track that dissolved into a dirt trail. At the end, the forest swallowed the world. Black trees, white snow, a silence so total it felt staged. Nathan followed the coordinates until the trail ended at a clearing. Snow blanketed the ground in unbroken white, except for a fallen log half rotten with decay. When he kicked it aside, the earth gave up a secret, a rusted metal hatch. The ladder descended into darkness. At the bottom, a steel door waited, an intercom mounted beside it. Nathan turned the dial. The bunker erupted with When Johnny Comes Marching Home, tinny and shrill, the melody almost militaristic in its precision. The sound was wrong here, bouncing off concrete in jagged echoes. He yanked the cord free, killing the music mid-verse. The room beyond was a grotesque blend of laboratory and shrine. Surgical instruments lined the counters in neat, obsessive rows. Bulletin boards bloomed with pinned star charts, newspaper clippings about lights in the night sky, and scraps of frantic handwriting. And then, opposite the entrance, a glass wall. Behind it, a dense blue mist churned, hiding whatever lay beyond. A computer hummed in the corner. On one monitor, a single file. For Harrow. The recording began without preamble. "Hello, Detective Harrow," a man's voice said, distorted, but not enough to hide the confidence in his tone. He told Nathan about the basilisk, how it had descended from the sky 20 years ago, how it had cured his terminal brain cancer, how it had asked for a child in return. A hiss cut through the recording as the mist began to clear. Nathan's heart kicked hard against his ribs. Through the glass emerged something that broke every rule of anatomy. It stood vaguely human in outline, but the proportions were wrong. Limbs long and thin, ending in hands that splintered into a spiderweb of fingers. Its skin was the color of wet clay, slick with slime, and its chest was open. Curled inside that cavity, bound in strands of living tissue, was a small body. Orange hair matted against a pale skull, a single bloodshot green eye opening sluggishly. Adam Carver. The boy's movements were weak, jerking. Muffled cries seeped through the glass, the sound thick with agony. Nathan's throat tightened until it hurt. His palm flattened against the cold surface, useless, a gesture Adam couldn't even feel. The voice in the recording droned on. The basilisk's fluids could cure cancer, it said. Adam's mind was kept alive inside a dream of a future he'd never live, feeding the creature. They were one now. Separating them would kill both. Then came the choices. Call the authorities, and the government would take them. Adam's torment would continue, hidden in some secure lab. Or kill them both. End it now. Adam's other eye opened, glistening with tears. He stared directly at Nathan, his gaze full of pleading. Nathan couldn't translate into words. The basilisk's fingers twitched, and Adam's eyes slid shut. Nathan's hand shook as it tightened on the gun. When he finally climbed out of the hatch, snow was falling again, soft flakes settling on the hot metal of his pistol. The forest was silent, the kind of silence that pressed into the skin. Nathan sat on the fallen log, his shoulders shaking. The gun, 2 bullets, lighter than before. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the trees, his voice cracking. "I'm so damn sorry."